Hello everybody, I'm Liz, and today I want to talk about DNFing books because, as I have told you in a previous video, I have been DNFing books a lot these past few months, and I know that here on BookTube or in the reading community in general, we try to stress finishing a book and not rating it unless you've read it. Even though that's very stressed here, I want to say, like, if you're not feeling a book, don't push yourself to read it. I am always struggling to push myself to read it because I haven't been in the mood to read these past few months. And so, in a sense, making this video is guilting me into picking these books back up, but also just reflecting on why I put them down and why I haven't picked them back up. So throughout the years, I used to say on my channel that the only book I've ever truly DNF'd is Aragon by Christopher Paolini. And that is true. I was so bored in that story and I gave up. I stopped reading it. I had only 50 to 100 pages left in the book and I just couldn't do it anymore. So I still feel like that reigns true, that is really the only true book I've completely walked away from. But now it's a little different. More recently, I have technically stopped reading, effectively DNFing Les Mis by Victor Hugo. Honestly, I felt like I got to a really great stopping point, and this is a huge book. It is 1,500 plus pages, and it's an intimidating read. It's Old English. It's published a long time ago. It's hard to get through. I read a third of this puppy stopping when Jean Valjean and Cosette are together in the cathedral seeking asylum. Cosette's still a child, and it's a great stopping point. I know I'm going to pick it up and read it, even though it's technically DNF'd for now. I am going to get back to it. The next book I effectively DNF'd last year was The Clash of Kings by George R.R. Martin. This is the second book in the Song of Ice and Fire. And I got about 60% of the way through it. And I collectively DNF'd this book because the talk in the Lannister army of raping and pillaging and dealing with their conquests was too much for me, and Theon Greyjoy's point of view left me so grossed out. I was watching videos of kittens. So collectively, I had to stop this for my mental health. It was just very negative for me, and I don't know if I'm going to pick this book up again. Maybe, I don't know. Everyone raves about this series and that Theon Greyjoy gets his just desserts, blah blah blah, but I don't know if I'm going back to it. Part of me still wants to, but a lot of me says it might not be worth it. And now we're going to get into the stack of books that I have collectively DNF'd over the past few months. And it is a stack. First off, we have The Map of Salt and Stars by Jennifer Zenab Joketer. I am embarrassed that I DNF'd this book because I only read the first chapter. I think it was just not for me when I picked it up. I tried reading it on the plane out of Scotland, and I just couldn't do it. So I definitely want to get back to this because the premise just sounds so beautiful and I know I want to read it, so I just need to hop back into it. The other book I collectively DNF'd that I'm also very embarrassed about is The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is my tome of all 3 of the stories, The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King. And this is another one where I read basically the prelude in Scotland, and then I stopped after that. I want to get back to it. This is definitely something that I want to read. Again, it's a chunky book, over 1,000 pages long, and I know it's going to take me a very, very long time to get through it, but I want to at some point. Now, the next book might be a more permanent DNF. I don't know. And that is Carla Feathers by Niksi Unleashed, which is depressing because I was super excited for this book. It has phoenixes and magic and sister rivalry, and it just sounded so amazing. However, the first time I read this, I got to chapter 14, I think, and I collectively stopped reading it. The audiobook was due, so I had to get rid of the audiobook. I was a little confused at what was going on because I don't think that the audiobook was the best choice. And also, I had started reading this before going away to Scotland, and then obviously I had to pick the books I brought with me, and because I wasn't quite feeling this, I didn't bring it to Scotland with me. And then a couple months later, I tried picking it up from scratch by just physically reading it, and I only got to chapter 3. And I don't know if I'm feeling the author's writing style, and maybe that's what's hindering me in the process of reading this. I do still want to get to it, but I just don't know if and when that will happen. And then we get to a book that I honestly stopped reading it purely because the audiobook was due, and this was after my father passed away, and that's when the realization hit me that maybe it's not reading exactly. Like, audiobooks are fine, but physically reading books is where I struggle. The passion to physically read a book, it's not there anymore. And so we have the next book I've stopped reading, which is Niksi Unleashed. This is book 2 in the Niksi series by Scott Rankin. I loved the first book. The second book is still amazing, but I stopped reading it about halfway through because, like I said, the audiobook was due, and I was gonna pick up and physically read this book, but every time I looked at the pages and looked at the story and tried to sit down and read it, I couldn't. I'm struggling so hardcore with just sitting down and reading. I just can't do it anymore. I need to get into that place in my brain to where I can pick this book back up again and actually read it, because I definitely want to read it and then get to the next book and finish the series because it is fantastic. The next book is, again, fell prey to vacation. I picked up The Light Between Worlds by Laura E. Weymouth, and I got a good chunk of it read, 50 pages read, and then I went to California. And I did almost 0 reading in California. I think I read another 50 pages of Educated. And this one was dropped, and I continued on with Educated. And I think why that happened is because after vacation and then the subsequent passing of my father, I didn't feel like reading anything fantastical. And maybe that's the same case with Niksi Unleashed, which is a science fiction novel. I might not be able to read fantasy for a while. Lastly, the last book I've put down, which you guys know about because I was contemplating putting it down when I started my channel up again, and that was Shadow of the Fox by Julie Kagawa. I really love the world and the lore and the story of this book, but I can't connect to the characters, and it's making the story drag, and that's why I had to put it down. I want to get back into it, as again, I'm about 50% of the way through, and I plan on getting back into it. I believe that the audiobook was very much so not for me. The male audio narrator was very off-putting to me, and especially when he tried to speak the women parts of the book, it frustrated and irritated me. So I stopped the audiobook, and I want to get back into this by physically reading it, but again, with everything going on, me not having the heart to physically read books, but also me struggling in the fantasy worlds, I might have to wait to get back into this. Alright, so there we have the books I've stopped reading. And now, to end this on a positive note, I want to get into the books I am currently reading, and the books that I'm hoping to spur me into loving physically reading books again. First, I'm doing the audiobook of Hunting Prince Dracula by Carrie Maniscalco. This is the second book in her Stalking Jack the Ripper series. I know that I really enjoyed the audio for Stalking Jack the Ripper, and so I figured that I would also really enjoy the audio for this. It can propel me into starting fantasy, starting historical fiction, and loving these fantastical stories and mystery to start making me love reading again. And so I'm really hopeful. I am about 10 chapters in, so I just started it, and I am so stoked. And then we have Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. I've loved Neil Gaiman's previous works that I have read, and this one has always been on my list, especially since the Amazon Prime TV series. So I want to get into this. This is not on my library audiobook list, so I have to physically read it. So it's going to push me into reading again, reading physical books again, which is great. And it's very much so a fantasy because it's an angel and a demon teaming up to stop the apocalypse, but it's very different from high fantasy or other types of stories that I've had on this list. And so I'm hoping that these two books will help propel me into reading again. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please leave me some comments down below about how your reading is going recently. Are you struggling? Have you read this fantastic book that's just gripped you and made you really love reading? Please let me know. And also, remember your daily check-in. How are you doing today? How do you feel? Has anything new happened to you? It has snowed for me for the first time yesterday here in Utah. And honestly, driving yesterday was a bit of a stress-induced panic because I don't like driving in snow. But I do love the look of snow and watching snow fall. I'm excited for it to get cold because cold weather is my element. And so I'm feeling for it today. Anyway, thank you again for watching this video. And until next time, remember that I love you. Bye!